Hi there, welcome to What's Great in Gaming. My name is Reed Austin. This is a series that critically analyzes the great things in gaming in the form of a video essay. I want to dive into things that I love in gaming. Today, we're going to dive into the fantastic world of Resident Evil 8. Village. Released on May 7th, 2021, Village has become one of my favorite games ever. But what is great? To agree on a definition of great, I will define it before starting the analysis. When I use the term great, I describe it as a positive experience that occurred in the game that stuck with me and enhanced my enjoyment of the game, or an aspect of a game that I believe achieves something worthwhile. Now that we know what I mean when I say great, you now have a tool to evaluate great for yourself. In art and media, great is entirely subjective. What I love, you may dislike, which is okay. Neither of us is wrong in our enjoyment of art, but I don't want to fall into a fallacy of toxic positivity either. Toxic positivity is where everything is great in all games because, from someone's point of view, somebody loves this game. So that must mean it's a great game. Well, no. There are tried and true mechanics that game developers pour their hearts and souls into to make their games work, to make them good or great. We will navigate through those mechanics today, trying to avoid toxic criticism and toxic positivity to share with you what I think makes Resident Evil 8 great. To understand my bias in gaming, I encourage you to check out the link in the description that takes you to my website where it breaks down my preferences. Prologue. Playing through Village has been an exceptional experience for 7 key reasons. I have cut these 7 reasons into 7 chapters for our time together today. First, I need to talk about expectations. For example, if you expected a character to be the antagonist for a whole game, but they died early on, that could ruin your experience. Or perhaps, if you thought a game was a survival horror, but turned out to be an MMO adventuring game, that may cause you to dislike the game no matter what it had to offer. Expectations are essential to your enjoyment of the game. Next to no games can overcome a player's expectations if a game was in opposition to those expectations to begin with. I'd be curious to know if you've ever experienced a game that was in opposition to your expectations, but overcame them to become one of your favorite games of all time. Let me know in the comments of this video. Chapter 1. Expectations are the most substantial factor in whether you enjoy a game or not, regardless of the game's content. If it is talked about as one of the best games ever, most players will often express surprise about there not being more to it due to that critical acclaim it heard all about. What I have found in my experience is the best way to enjoy games is to see what interests you, ignore all the marketing, and go in blind. That's what I did with Resident Evil 8 and was blown away because my only expectations were Village is a horror game and it has a big vampire lady. The internet's kind of going crazy about her. I hope it's as fun as Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake. Without creating expectations for the game, I could play through and evaluate the game as it is, not as I wanted it to be. Instead of creating a thought process of what the game could have done differently, I got the experience to ask, what did the game do? What was it going for? It is fun to create what-ifs in games, and I encourage that discussion. Unfortunately, I often see this criticism that holds these what-ifs against the game without presenting any evidence that they could have been done or achieved these what-ifs. To develop a game is to compromise. Developers want to create these incredible experiences, but resources limit their ability to do so. Even with tons of money, there are still limits to what a team's resources are. For every idea I may hypothesize, someone else can what-if my idea into a more significant, more spectacular degree that would further enhance or isolate the players who play the game, potentially. So what-ifs are a great thought experiment, but I believe they can obstruct to trying to evaluate a game fairly. Too often I find reviews online use a what-if as a criticism against the game, even though it's something that's not real. For Chapter 1, the big key is Resident Evil 8 delivered on my expectations for the game and exceeded them, but obviously your mileage is going to vary. Before I leave expectations, I need to define one more term: nuance. In this video, I will be constantly highlighting the nuance of my experience, focusing on what worked for me. Merriam-Webster defines nuance as 1. A subtle distinction or variation. 2. A subtle quality, nicety. 3. Sensible to awareness or an ability to express delicate shadings as if meanings, feelings, or value. There's more to it than it's not binary black and white. In addition to those definitions, I will use nuance to discuss the many views a topic or term may have. So much so that even if I didn't like a particular part in a game, that doesn't mean it makes or breaks the game for me. For example, in Resident Evil Village, the Heisenberg section inside Village isn't my favorite section, and I didn't like a lot of it. However, just because I didn't enjoy some aspects of the game inside that area doesn't mean the whole game is now ruined for me and unredeemable. It's still a terrific game. This sort of gets into that discussion of like, what's a perfect movie? What's a perfect game? Well, there isn't one. There's always going to be errors and compromises and limitations. So even though a movie might be not technically perfect, it can be subjectively perfect. And in my view, Resident Evil Village comes really darn close. For the most part, my views are not binary, especially in art. I was inspired to start this series because I believe it is meaningful to discuss the good we see in art so others might get to experience and see the same joy I got to take away from art that they might not have seen otherwise or gotten a chance to experience. If you believe a game should be something else than what it is, no matter what the game tries, it will never be good enough for you. But if you go in with minimal or no expectations, you allow yourself to judge the game for yourself. It is a strategy to be more honest with how you experience your games. I believe it encourages you to think for yourself instead of listening to some Reddit post or silly YouTube video. Chapter 2, the story. Village portrays a story that works well for players. It certainly worked for me. Ethan Winters loses his daughter Rose after he witnesses the death of his wife. A once trusted friend now appears to kidnap his child and murder his wife. He's transported from his home but dropped into the middle of a forest after his vehicle is destroyed. After the crash, Ethan looks for safety but finds himself inside a cursed village. A village filled with monsters who stole his daughter away during the transportation. The adventure kicks off with 2 clear objectives that will stay true throughout the entirety of this adventure: find Rose and survive. The game sets up mysteries from the very start. These are what I'll call promises to the player, questions or foreshadowing that will be paid off by the player's end. Why was Mia killed? Why did a gunshot barely affect her? Why was Chris, a previous good guy, doing something terrible? Where is Rose? How do we save her? The story takes these essential questions and answers them all by the end of the game in a satisfying way. Resident Evil uses one of the most robust tools to make players care about their story by making it relatable. Relatability? What is relatable about werewolves, mold monsters, magical healing waters, and a magical fat man who manages to be everywhere at once? First off, how dare you talk about that beautiful person like that? Secondly, his name is the Duke. Thirdly, it's relatable in the same way Star Wars has become one of the most famous movie series of all time because of its relatability that transcends both cultures and language barriers. Star Wars isn't relatable because of its laser swords, spaceships, aliens, or space guns. Instead, it's relatable to people because of the struggle of good versus evil, the desire to go on adventures, learn new things, and overcome the struggles that weigh us down as people. These are the things that relate to ordinary people. The themes, the character conflicts, and the hero's journey draw many people into stories that are being told throughout the world. Village is relatable because Ethan isn't some Navy SEAL or Nobel Prize winning genius who has been a savant or a prodigy since he was a child. He's an ordinary person. By the time Village happens, he receives some training from Chris Redfield, the equivalent of a Navy SEAL. Still, Ethan hasn't become more than an average person at the start of Village as far as we know. We can put ourselves right into his shoes. Maybe you're gun-loving uncle has given you a lesson or two in the past, that could be enough for a lot of players just to jump in to Ethan's journey at the start of the game. All he has basically is a general idea like us. Ethan's motivated by two essential needs to start the game: the need to survive and to save his loved one, his child, Rose. These two objectives almost all humans can relate to. If we haven't ever had the desperation of trying to survive, many of us play out that fantasy or even try and prepare for what would happen if you were thrown into a survival situation. I mean, there's kind of like entire industries dedicated to this stuff. Most people's obsession with survival is hardwired into us through evolution. Media demonstrates our obsession with survival by pumping out countless movies, books, TV shows, and video games that continue to receive critical acclaim. I'm sure you're thinking of at least one of them right now. We want to survive. Village allows players to play out this fantasy to see how we would do if we were thrown into this unbelievable situation. What grips me is how the game rewards you for learning the ins and outs of the world. Who wouldn't want to become the master of a world that is supposed to be unwinnable if this was turned real? Seeing Ethan as a caring father who wants to protect his daughter at all costs has been essential to his growth from the first game for me. Ethan proves he will go to the underworld and back for his daughter. Why wouldn't I want to come along for the ride? That is a good story on the surface, but it gets reinforced through the game mechanics, through the bosses, through the dressings, through the immersion, and all the way through the process. It builds on one another. And that's why the story is a big reason this game is great. Keeping Ethan's core goals in mind allows this game to then exaggerate some of the fantastical elements as we progress without ruining my experience. The story weaves itself masterfully in a straightforward telling of a father's struggle to save his child while confronting his past. Village's story is in 5D chest, like the entire Resident Evil story can feel at times. Village can stand on its own, and each act builds on the previous, thematically, mechanically, and achieves a fulfilling conclusion which wouldn't be possible without the 5 great antagonists that stand in your way. Chapter 3, the antagonists. Village's antagonists steal the show for the game. Each antagonist is compelling in their own right. They fill different character tropes inside a dysfunctional family run by dysfunctional, corrupt, and evil Mother Miranda. Surviving through lycanthropic monsters of Village, Ethan quickly realizes the town is fanatical in their worship of Mother Miranda and her children. In your very first meeting, each of our 4 lords' flaws are on display. Angie can't help but want to play games with Ethan and encourage a fight between Lady Demetress and Heisenberg. A clear desire for chaos and conflict. Moreau's deformed body and weak personality causes him to be in the way of others, so he grovels back to Mother Miranda after being chastised by his siblings. He cowers in the back of the scene, not adding anything more to the conversation because the others treat him so poorly. Lady Demetress is so vain she can't handle the thought of not getting her way, causing her to throw hissy fits when Mother Miranda gives Ethan to Heisenberg. Heisenberg tries to play things cool, but quickly becomes enraged like a child, wanting nothing more than to do what he wants on his terms, because no one, not even his mom, is going to tell him what he can and can't do. Each of their personality traits is built into your journey of this game. Each section of the game reflects each antagonist's personality. Capcom expertly crafted each of the Lord's domains in a way that tells you more about their personality than their journeys or journals or any paper could. I love Resident Evil Village for that reason. The characters synergize so well with the mechanics, with the story, with the areas, the graphics, the way the game looks, feels, and sounds. It works. So what about them? Lady Demetress has a lavish castle with 3 adopted daughters that Mother Miranda generously allowed her to have. Everything about the mansion is luxurious, but under that lavish lifestyle are dungeons filled with torture devices and gore and blood wine cellars? What is this? It's a beautiful foreshadowing of Lady Demetress's true nature. You play through the entire castle, uncovering all the things beneath the surface, and then you find out what is beneath the surface for Lady Demetress. On the surface, she appears to be beautiful, vain, in control. Still, we find her self-conscious about the opinions of Mother Miranda. She believes herself above everybody else, and yet seeks validation from Mother Miranda. She's an example of pride at its worst and an inability to reconcile or self-reflect on her faults. When facing her down, Ethan witnesses her proper form, a monstrous amalgamation of mold, a classic example of beauty being ugly on the inside. I love how her domain perfectly reflects who she is as a person. On the inside, she's a monster, and beneath that surface, you can see all of her monstrous actions for what she's done to the village over the years. According to the journals in-game, Donna is a character suffering from mental illness before Mother Miranda experimented on her. After the experiments, her mental illness was exacerbated by her new powers. At her core, she didn't want to be left alone after the loss of her family. Falling into isolation, Mother Miranda brought Donna back to the world by giving her the ability to manipulate pheromones of plants to cause hallucinations, in addition to control over her puppets. Is that how that works? Donna's house is littered with porcelain dolls, a showcase of her desire to be loved and needed. She creates new friends to stay with her forever, like she demanded Ethan do upon his arrival. Rounding off her personality is her favorite doll, Angie. It is a manifestation of her mental illness. Angie allows Donna to indulge in the very worst of the games she's been dying to play with people all her life. Her home is this beautiful mansion sitting on a cliffside of a waterfall. It is far from the village. Her home is isolated, just like her, and underneath the surface of her home is again a much darker place. A place of horrors for whoever is trapped inside Donna's basement. A clear connection to Donna's personality traits. Moreau is given the most run-down and broken area out of the four lords' locations. From his home inside the crumbling mines to the broken windmills flooded by the reservoir, gross mucus covers walls, covering and hiding Moreau in his own sickness. It isn't hard to see that Moreau is the black sheep of the family for the four lords. Even Mother Miranda looks down on him, as proven by the notes Chris finds at the end of the game. Moreau's desires to be treated well is reflected in his determination to do better than the others by stopping Ethan after Ethan steals his rose jars right from under his nose. He mutates into a leviathan of sorts early into our encounter. For Moreau, there is no dungeon to go deeper into. What is hidden below the surface is his need to be validated. This seems to be a common theme. Of the four lords, he's the only one that is wearing a crown. He shows in his appearance how badly he wants to be validated by Mother Miranda and the rest of his siblings. Moreau's area reflects a broken person with a broken home. The way he dresses, the way everything is in disarray inside his life and in his domain, it complements and tells you the story of Moreau without having the game spoon-feed the entirety of the story to you. Finally, there's Heisenberg. His factory speaks to both his metal powers and ingenuity. Creating a metal army to take on Miranda, Heisenberg is the most developed of all the antagonists, and that's probably thanks to the extra time we get to spend with him, being the last of the lords that gets to live. It is shocking to see that Heisenberg has nearly the same goal as Ethan, to be free of Mother Miranda. But the brilliant twist is Heisenberg will use any means to reach his goal, even using Rose as a weapon. Heisenberg's methods completely conflict with Ethan's most critical goal from the very start of the adventure: save Rose. His factory is a beautiful show of his willingness to invent anything to be free. His trials on different villagers demonstrates his madness to defeat Mother Miranda. It's not about survival for Heisenberg, it's about escape, which is a nuanced clash of Ethan's goals. His whole domain is a statue to obsession, and once something stands in his way, he will do anything to win. That's including turning himself into a monster. Each of the four lords we spend most of the game fighting deliver a performance that captured me. Each personality shined, making the gameplay more fun. Each of the lords made me more invested in the world as the game carried on. I cared if they lived or died, if I fought them, if Ethan could survive. And I cared about their backstories. How did they get there, and why do they have the powers they do? One of the highest compliments I can pay a video game is complaining that I wanted more. More in the sense that even though what I got was a good amount inside the game, boy, it was so interesting. I wanted so much more. It was so compelling. That's not to be confused with, hey, where's the rest of the game? I want more of the game. I think that this is unfinished. That's a very different feeling. Mother Miranda is the last of the five antagonists, pulling the strings like a Machiavellian villain. She's a solid antagonist with a relatable goal: to bring her daughter back to life at any cost. almost like saving her daughter. Exactly Ethan's goal as we play through the game. All of us will experience grief in our lifetime. Mother Miranda's singular goal is to bring her daughter back to life to overcome that grief that destroyed her life. What a terrific villain to act as Ethan's foil for this story. She is trying to save her child because she can't live without it in the same way Ethan is. Two of them can't achieve their goal because Rose's body is the only means in which Mother Miranda can bring her child back. So it's a winner take all for the exact same goal, but how they achieve it is what matters. The details matter. And I think that's what makes it so relatable, is that this isn't a world ending, the entire world is going to collapse and the universe is going to explode. It's a personal journey about survival and about saving loved ones. Without a doubt, the antagonists inside Village fit some classic tropes in storytelling. And despite those tropes, there's enough of twist or change on each of them that makes the entire experience fun. Chapter 4, Restraint. What sets this game apart from the other Resident Evil games I have played is Village's ability to demonstrate restraint. Restraint is something that the Resident Evil franchise slowly let go of with each release, if it ever had it to begin with. It was clear by Resident Evil 6, things had gone to boulder punching, helicopter leaping, anime fighting levels of extremes. It took the release of Resident Evil 7 to bring the series back down to its roots. Resident Evil 7 was praised for regrounding the series thanks to Ethan's adventure with the Baker family. I believe 8 continues that legacy despite expanding into a more adventurous game mode and tone instead of purely horror. Inside Resident Evil 8, I was prepared for cringe tropes or artificial inflation on the content, so then I would play the game longer so developers could boast about a longer playtime. Instead, I was met with more restraint than I thought possible for the franchise. The best example of my surprise at the game's restraint was when the player crosses the bridge toward Donna's house. A typical horror game would have had the bridge collapse just before you reach the other side, causing a 30-minute to an hour detour, fighting some other horrors, slowing down the main character's pacing and goals to a standstill.
Damn it again!
In this fictitious scenario I've just created, Ethan would need to beat some monster down there, so like let's call it Monster C, and then as he's getting his way back, oh no, there's more different new bosses were introduced, so these are things B2 through 4, because these are variations of this new bad guy, and we gotta get a MacGuffin, so then we can get out of this area to, oh yeah, get back to the thing we were trying to do an hour and a half ago, was go see Donna. So after all that time, what are we doing? Like, what happened? Oh yeah, we're supposed to be saving our daughter, right? Quickly, video games can derail themselves from their vision when they let go of restraint. I believe a fair amount of studios get caught up in asking, can we do that? Instead of saying, should we do that? When crafting their games. I find myself exhausted when games add artificial inflation to get the games to pad out the game's playing time. Shadow of War is one of the games I played that best demonstrates this at its core. To achieve the end game in Shadow of War, the player must defend all the holds in this game and level up their orcs, which tacks on another 10 hours of repetitive gameplay. Final mission is only available after playing through 25 to 35 hours of the campaign and then the additional 10 hours of defenses. Due to the repetitive nature of the defense mechanics and gameplay, it doesn't expand on anything, it doesn't hold your attention, and doesn't give the players any new experiences. It is purely added on to prevent players from beating the game too quickly. I loved Shadow of War. It just was so artificially inflated, it took away from my enjoyment of the game and made it not great. Resident Evil 8 could have followed these development philosophies to lengthen the game's playtime in the hopes of getting better reviews. Instead, they relied on the replayability of their game. Capcom chose to believe in their work in the Village game and that it would be good enough to stand alone, instead of trying to check boxes on what reviewers say, well, the game needs to have this, in order to be a great game. Instead, Capcom opted to give players rewards for playing their game and trusted players that these rewards would be enough to provide diverse enough gameplay and content. Some of these rewards are like infinite ammo rewards or unlocking new game modes to test out your ability. Village chooses to reward players for playing their game with new experiences. Using a challenge point system, Capcom encourages players to play through their game differently, creating completely different experiences. By trusting the players to seek out the different experiences, Village can provide anyone with an incredible experience. Instead of creating a larger-than-life set piece every few minutes like Resident Evil 6 did, they focus on building tension inside 8. The game makes early promises to the player, then pays them off in satisfying ways because it has a chance to breathe, it has a chance to build tension. It has a chance to be what it is trying to be. By and large, Village shows an incredible amount of restraint by not having 5-phase boss encounters for each lord, or having multiple precursor sections before finding or approaching a lord. It lets the players build momentum to the goals, bond with each of the lords, and then have a reason to care about playing this game. And of course, achieve the 2 most important goals of Ethan: save Rose and survive. Chapter 5, Gameplay. At the end of the day, the story, the antagonists, and the expectations will all crumble if there's not a strong gameplay at the foundation of a video game. Resident Evil provides a great gameplay loop to keep players engaged. On your first playthrough of the game, it emphasizes exploring. Where's ammo? Where's the most powerful guns? How do I survive? What's the best route to go? How do I get past this door? Who is this beautiful man, the Duke? A player might become overwhelmed with the world of Village during their first playthrough. To fix that, the merchant character helps us throughout. The Duke may be a greedy merchant looking to profit off Ethan's misfortune, but throughout the game, he becomes an endearing friend who does nothing but help Ethan achieve his most important goal: save Rose. Through his upgrade system, you can make Ethan into a Chris Redfield level undead fighting hero. Ethan is given a bag to carry all of his weapons in and healing remedies, all from the Duke. Quickly, the game taught me the value of managing my resources when I opened up the Duke's shop for the first time. Budgeting your resources becomes the lifeblood of your first playthrough in Village. It's part of the absolute fun of the gameplay. What can I keep? What should I keep in my inventory? How much ammo do I need? How do I get more ammo? Which keys do I need to be able to progress? I have to have that in my inventory. And what should I be able to dispose of? That is really engaging for me. The game's fun is saving your resources to overcome the diversity of enemies and challenges thrown your way during your journey. Capcom took the criticism of RE7 to heart, as shown by their puppet marketing campaign. Well, aside from being too scary, a chief complaint of 7 was that there wasn't enough monster variety. Inside Village, players are hammered with 16 different enemy types outside the set-piece boss fights. The number of enemies gives the game opportunity to create engaging and memorable encounters, even with generic enemies. The gameplay is sluggish, and the game purposely messes with the frame rate when you aim to help make you feel like this is harder than it should be. The general progression and upgrading of your weapons then rewards you with these initial weaknesses turning to strengths. All of a sudden you can aim a little better, move a little faster, the zombies go down a little quicker, and you start to get more comfortable with the world. Your rewards remove the tension and the stress upon your subsequent playthroughs by providing you with unlimited ammo weapons or other powerful unlocks for completing challenges. I consider this a perfect feedback loop for single-player game experiences. The more I play, the more I'm rewarded. And then, if you get too overpowered, there's always the opportunity to go back to that original experience. Resident Evil Village ignores the current trend in the gaming industry to elongate the game loop purposely to create microtransactions to alleviate that grind, or to pad out the game's length. Instead, the game opts to stick with its roots to give players more tools to play their games in entirely different ways upon subsequent completions of their game or challenges. One of the reasons I adore the Resident Evil series is because it allows me to have a nearly new experience on every playthrough. It's ridiculous. I can continually optimize my route through the game and get better, finish it quicker, or maybe collect every item on one playthrough, or defeat every single bad guy possible in a playthrough, or maybe I'll use a knife only. Depending on how I choose to play in this particular session, I get a new experience, and it doesn't feel like it's costing me something. That's often a problem most games have when they end up presenting these options. Inside the field of game theory, no, not that game theory, there's this idea of dominant strategy, and that really does rock a lot of video games. But Resident Evil threads that needle beautifully, and it allows you to try new things without feeling punished and ruining your experience for not playing the most optimized way, because you can optimize the other ways you play. The rewards inside Village range from unlimited ammo weapons to freaking lightsaber. just wonderful. The gameplay between Ethan and the enemies is well implemented as well. You can recognize the loop easily inside the bonus mode, Mercenaries. After beating the game, the Challenge Point shop opens with a new game mode available for cheap. It is actually way more affordable than just about anything else in the store. Wait, why wouldn't Capcom make an entirely new game mode extremely expensive? That should be a big reward. Something players should grind for, right? Well, it appears not. My guess is Capcom actually wants you to keep playing their game. By the end of the first playthrough, you will have gotten the hang of a lot of the gameplay systems, and maybe you would want to perfect them. This mode costs you basically nothing. You can hop right in, and it cuts out everything but the combat loop, allowing players to hone in on their skills and experience the game again, but in a completely new way. Inside Mercenaries, there are bonus power-ups around the map implemented like perks from other game series. A timer pushes players to defeat as many enemies as possible and reach the exit. Keeping your combo alive is the secret to mastering the mode. It builds a satisfying momentum to achieve things that you couldn't do during the careful pacing of the main story mode. So Village comes with a lot of features in the gameplay. You can have just the raw fighting mechanics if you wanted at times, and then even push that to varying levels of difficulty. You can play the main game in varying levels of difficulty, ways, and experiences. And then it also offers all these different modes for you to enjoy, where you can view the 3D models or customize your HUD to make it more like a movie and less like a video game. It's really exceptional what Village was able to pack into its gameplay systems. Back to Mercenaries, while fighting, you learn each enemy's weakness to get a highest score possible. I constantly find each part of this game builds on itself. So while you're learning how to beat them in Mercenaries, when next time you play through in the main campaign, you're that much better for it. With excellent gameplay loop down, Resident Evil also jumps high hurdles by changing the player's experience as you play. For example, the game is close to horror when it's dealing with the hallucinations of Donna. It is closest to an action shooting gallery when you play through the Stronghold right before you go and confront Heisenberg. It is closest to an action morose section, almost feels like a dark comedy. And Lady Dimitrescu's mansion is a mystery escape thriller. I was taken by the Four Lords and their exciting adventures when I went in with no expectations for this game. Each location stood on its own as its own world. None of the sections felt like retextures or reskins of the previous areas. I felt each lord had their own identity for me to explore. Chapter 6, Puzzles. The puzzles inside Village are primarily simple, but work well at controlling the pacing. If a puzzle is too complex, the developer risks losing the player early in the game. The developers risk losing the players early in the game. If they are too easy, they become tedious. Village threads the needle in being reasonable enough to accomplish. There is a chance for players to get held up, but not feel like the puzzle is impossible to solve. Often, the hints for the puzzle seem so obvious, it keeps me trying even though I have no idea what the game's looking for. Once completed, I'm rewarded with a quick solve for the future playthroughs. It is a careful balance that I love in the Resident Evil series. Many voiced criticisms that Resident Evil 3's remake was cut short and wasn't as good because of many of the original puzzles being cut from the game. Puzzles are a core element of the Resident Evil games, starting with the very first one. I loved Resident Evil 8's implementation of puzzles this time around. Inside Village, puzzles feel fair and immersive. Finding the well wheels to locate items that may have been lost down there or hidden when the village started to be overrun makes a ton of narrative sense. Doors being locked or barricaded makes a lot of narrative sense, but it's also a mechanic. Lady Dimitrescu locking her doors to keep the unworthies and undesirables out, but also hiding her monstrosities down in the basement behind a multitude of puzzles. It all works so darn well. Angie can't help but play games with her victims, creating puzzles for them to solve. Moreau's world is in such disarray, everything being broken naturally creates puzzles to be solved just to travel through it. These puzzles are by no means perfect or totally immersive, but they were enough for me to enjoy. For the most part, the puzzles maintain my immersion to an appropriate level throughout Resident Evil 8, which really makes it great. Chapter 7, Self-Awareness, the final chapter. What brings it all together for me is the game's self-awareness. It tries to be itself at all times. It's a horror, action, drama, tension, thriller, comedy, and puzzle all in one. It doesn't shy away from how crazy the premise of the game is. Heisenberg has a legendary quote that calls out one of the most unbelievable and flooring instances in all the Resident Evil franchise, which is saying a lot, because a lot of crazy shit happens. But in the first game alone, you fight a giant snake, zombie sharks, a supersized spider. I mean, what is this series-defining moment that is called out and laughed at? That is so crazy that it made the internet lose its shit. Well, it's when Chris tries to escape in a volcanic area in Resident Evil 5. A boulder many times his size comes barreling toward him. Does he jump out of the way? Is he crushed? No. Chris stands his ground, stops the boulder, then proceeds to punch, not shove, punch the boulder into the lava uphill to form a bridge to walk across. Yeah. Okay. That's a different level. Inside Village, Ethan is in the middle of a fight with Heisenberg over the very future of saving Rose. The drama is cranked up to 10 when Heisenberg's factory explodes. And then this happens.
No! Where my lordy? That boulder punching asshole!
What's great about that is the game knows this is crazy. We're here to have fun, and it brings like the whole concept of the game together for me. What are they going for? A good time, a compelling story. It's got all these elements, but it doesn't take itself way too seriously, or it's not so loose that it makes you desire like, dude, if you just took it a little more seriously, something really cool could have been done here. The game achieves that balance. Now, this isn't the only instance of the game being able to laugh at itself. There are lines of dialogue, papers, journals you'll find across the map, and even enemy interactions that will probably make you laugh out loud like it did for me. The game isn't above criticism or being laughed at. I find that to be the most endearing quality of the game. It tells a dramatic story of a father trying to save his daughter from biological monstrosities, but still lets the player know, hey, we're having fun. For example, this concept, I believe, is a line many players struggled with when trying to enjoy The Last of Us Part 2. It's a divisive game that I will not discuss in detail in this video, but the broad strokes help illustrate a point here. The Last of Us Part 2 takes an artistic approach to tell a story that Naughty Dog wanted to share. Not necessarily a story or a game that was fun for the player to play or enjoy or experience. Resident Evil 8 appears to be constantly trying to make the game as fun as possible for the players while challenging them along the way. Taking away the player's weapons during the Donna section is probably the most memorable section of the game for most players. I know it is for me. It builds the most tension of any of the other sections. Ethan is faced with grotesque horror baby monster that I was thrilled to escape as soon as possible from. You know what the funny thing is about that section? The scariest section of the game? It's the safest section of the game. There is only one enemy during the whole sequence before the boss fight with Angie and Donna. It shows up right at the end trying to eat you. It's a straightforward, and once you learn the section, it's not hard. You're not really in danger. You can complete it in future playthroughs in less than 10 minutes. Developers could have made this section grueling, really twisting the knife in the player's back by putting more enemies in there or more traps and challenges to reinforce the helplessness that Ethan has without his weapons. That would have made the game scarier, probably even more hopeless at times. But would that have been fun? Would it have followed the fun? I don't believe it does, because what could you, the player, do to prevent that scenario from happening? Nothing. The game takes away your guns, and that can be extremely unsatisfying as a player, but they were able to present it in such a way that it was a fun experience, a memorable experience, and not a frustrating one. At its core, Village doesn't try to be anything but itself, a fun game. My conclusion/epilogue. Village has become an instant classic of games I will finally remember for the rest of my life. Your experience will differ based on your tastes, preferences, expectations, and where you are at in life. But it's my hope, hearing about this in today's video or watching some of the things on screen, that maybe you saw something inside this game that you didn't see before. I adore the hero's journey, sacrifice, drama, tension, comedy, action, and horror the game has to offer. The gameplay builds on itself and rewards you for enjoying and playing their game. It shows off restraint to prevent players from burning out or losing their suspension of disbelief when going through each section of the game. By no means is Village a perfect game, but it is a great game. So much so that I believe Resident Evil Village is what's great in gaming right now. Thanks for watching this episode of What's Great in Gaming. I was inspired to make this series because there was so much hateful or angry criticism of games online, and I found it exhausting. There's a whole industry online that profits off of just hating whatever's created for others to consume or enjoy. Now, absolutely, there's corporate cynicism and all that in there, but there's genuine creators out there making things for others to enjoy, and people are just hating on it because it's easier to do. I find it easier to hate things in our world because our world is cruel and unfair. So why not try and find the real goodness that's out there in the world and inside our gaming worlds? I want to highlight those so that maybe others can experience more of the good instead of this bombardment of constant bad we get these days. So that's my hope with this series, not to dish out toxic positivity or negativity, but to highlight the experience that had brought me joy so that you can share in some of that joy too. Or if you already had fun with the game, and maybe some of the nostalgia if you experienced the same things I did. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a like. That's all YouTube seems to care about these days, and consider subscribing. Like, if you want to support what's great in gaming, you can purchase any of my posters or t-shirts I have for sale on my website. I got cell phone cases with a really cool design and other merchandise at radrendering.com. That way you could get something cool or maybe become a multiverse member. You're getting something back in return. But if you don't have money to spend, there's always other things you can do to help out the show if you care. Like, you could just click another video after watching one of my videos. You don't even have to watch the whole thing. Just give that a like, and YouTube will say, oh, people like clicking through this guy's videos. Let's keep doing that. Keep suggesting it to others that might get to enjoy it as well. Whatever it is, just watching my videos is always more than enough. But in case you were curious, I had to do the whole spiel. Thanks for watching What's Great in Gaming. Be well until I see you in the next episode. Go find what brings you joy in gaming and go share it with others. Take care, and let's head back into the Multiverse Arcade.